All right. So first off, I wanted to just take a minute on behalf of the Maryland Higher Education Commission, to thank MCASA for putting on this training, and to thank those of you in attendance for attending. Your presence here allows us to provide students across the state of Maryland with a resource to find the representation they need when they're involved in a Title IX proceeding. My name's Alexandra, or Alex Shalou. I'm the Associate Director for Institution Review at MHEC, and one of the processes that my team handles is managing a fund that provides reimbursement opportunities for attorneys who are representing students in Title IX cases. And so today I wanted to tell you a little bit about that fund and about the procedure for applying for that reimbursement. So first off, there's really two things that we do with Title IX at MHEC. Pursuant to the education article and written into the Code of Maryland regulations, MHEC maintains a list of attorneys that are willing to represent students in Title IX proceedings, either pro bono or at a reduced rate. In addition to maintaining that list so that we can provide students with access to representation, we also manage a legal representation fund that will help with payment of fees and costs that are associated with those proceedings. So first off, as far as the list goes, there are eligibility requirements in order to be included on that list. So some of those are pretty straightforward. You need to be a licensed attorney that's in good standing before the Court of Appeals in Maryland. You need to have malpractice insurance that's sufficient to cover representation in a Title IX proceeding. You need to have attended a training of at least 5 hours that includes training on trauma-informed representation. So that's what today is all about. So since you've attended this training, you can check that box. And then you need to complete and submit the MHEC Title IX Legal Representation Attorney List registration. And that registration form is available on the MHEC website, but I will also drop this presentation into the chat, and all of the links in here are active, so you can click straight from the presentation to the list and get that filled out when you're finished with today's training. Once you've gotten your name onto that list, in order to maintain eligibility, we just need you to keep your contact information up to date with us so that we can provide accurate information to the students who are seeking your representation. We ask that you take at least one case each academic year, and of course that you would treat all the parties involved in the Title IX process with respect and dignity. So this is about the list that we maintain, but regardless of whether a student chooses representation by an attorney that's on the list or chooses another attorney to represent them, that attorney may still be eligible for fees to be reimbursed through our legal representation fund. So as far as the legal representation fund works, there are a few requirements that need to be met in order for those reimbursement requests to be approved. The first is that there needs to be the availability of the appropriated funds. I have not myself heard of a situation in which the funds have been exhausted for a fiscal year, but they are state funds, so that is always a possibility. So first thing we want to sort of qualify is that the funds need to be available. This particular fund applies only to Title IX proceedings, so it would not include coverage for any civil or criminal proceedings, even if they arose out of the same instance. And it also doesn't cover any other misconduct proceedings that are not Title IX related. So it's a narrow definition of what these can be applied to. If the student chooses an attorney that is on the MHEC list, attorneys on the MHEC lists are limited to charging $120 per hour for their services. I'll qualify that with that's a recent change. So the $120 per hour is effective this new fiscal year. So July 1st, starting July, proceedings that start after July 1st, 2023 would be subject to this $120 per hour limit to the fee. Proceedings that started prior to July 1st were reimbursed at a rate of $100 per hour. So this is kind of a recent increase in that fee. In addition to the fee, the payment for per hour services, you can also apply for reimbursement for travel costs, up to $200 in travel costs, as well as certain office expenses like secretarial and copies. And those types of expenses can also be submitted for reimbursement through this fund. While attorneys that are on the list are limited to that $120 per hour rate, if the student chooses an attorney that's not on the list, that attorney may charge more than that limited rate. However, they can only apply for reimbursement at $120 per hour, and the student would be responsible for paying the difference in that amount. In addition to the per hour rate limit, there is also a cap on the number of hours per case that this fund will reimburse for, and that's 20 hours per case. So any representation beyond 20 hours must be provided pro bono. But again, if a student chooses an attorney that is not on the list, the student is simply responsible for the difference between the 20 hours that the fund will reimburse for and the amount of hours that were covered. And the last requirement for approval of the reimbursement is that the reimbursement request needs to be submitted within 60 days of the termination of representation. And this gets submitted to MHEC by email. So I'll give you that email address a little bit later. The things that you should submit with this request, there is a payment request form. Again, this, like I said, this presentation will link you directly there, but all of these forms are available on the MHEC website. If you go to the MHEC website, and there's a box for Title IX proceedings, and then all of these forms are linked to there. But initially we have a payment request form that you need to complete. The payment request form is a brief form that has you complete some information in general on the services that you provided and the total amount of payment that you're requesting. Beyond that, we have the additional information form. This has more detailed information on both yourself as well as the student that you're representing, what the type of offense is, the outcome, and whether or not there was an appeal that you participated in. Forms that are not available through MHEC, but that you do need to submit are your retainer representation agreement with the student that needs to be signed by both yourself and the student, as well as a detailed billing statement that lists, so for however many hours you're submitting payment for, the billing statement needs to reflect that in detail. One of the things that the fund reimburses for is travel costs. And so currently we don't have a travel cost reimbursement form available just yet. We're in the process of creating that, but it's not available just yet. So if you do have travel costs that you want to submit reimbursement for, we just ask that you reach out to us and touch base with what kind of documentation we would need. In general, if you're submitting mileage, then we need your Google Maps or your MapQuest directions that detail the mileage on there, receipts from any tolls or public transportation, that kind of standard things. The last form that MHEC does provide you with is the student certification form. This is a form that's completed by the student. It authorizes you as an attorney to seek reimbursement from MHEC. So it allows, in order to get reimbursement from us, you have to give us information. And so this form allows you to release that information to MHEC so that we can provide you with the reimbursement. And then the final piece of information is something that comes from the institution, we need the initial notice of proceedings from the institution. So that should be received by the student from the institution that they're attending or the institution that is instituting these proceedings. All of this documentation can be submitted by email. So you can email all of this documentation to MHEC. Once we receive it, we try to complete the reimbursement process within 60 days of receiving all of that documentation. Now, I will kind of hedge that a little bit with our internal in-office process. We try to complete within 60 days. And so that's our reviewing of the documentation that you submit, making sure everything's in order, that we have everything that we need, and that we approve that request. However, once we approve the request, the actual payment of the reimbursement is made by the Office of the Comptroller. And we don't have any control over how long the Office of the Comptroller takes. And it can often take several weeks for that reimbursement to go through and to sort of churn all the wheels in the Office of the Comptroller. You can speed that up a little bit by registering for direct deposit. You do that through the Office of the Comptroller. You can register as a vendor, and doing that in advance of your reimbursement request going through will speed up their time frame a little bit. So as I said, all of this information is available on the MHEC webpage. So this last page here is really just a list of links so that once you get this presentation, you can link right to the MHEC website, where we store all of our all of the reimbursement forms and documents that are there. Again, everything gets submitted to us by email, so you can just submit it to that Title IX proceedings.mhec@maryland.gov. Also, if you have questions about the process or need to check in on a reimbursement that you've submitted, you can do that all through that same email address. Are there any questions or discussion on any of that information?